Oh, hey friends. Oh my gosh, look where we are, behind the scenes of our next filming of Coffee with Kim. I'm so excited you're here. And if you thought the previous seasons were great, just wait. You're not going to believe who's stopping by for coffee.
And I've got the joy deep down in my heart. I'm waking up with your love from the start. I'm chasing the rainbow through the rain. I know it's gonna be a beautiful day.
Bullying. While we generally associate these aggressive behaviors with children, health experts and statistics show how these behaviors, if left unattended, can make devastating effects on adults. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Coffee, conversations of friends of faith to encourage and equip. I'm Kim Crabill, your host, and as always, delighted to be back with you today. On a previous episode of Coffee, I talked with Dr. Brandon Phillips and actor Jeremy Miller about their book, When I Wished Upon a Star. It's the compelling story of Brandon, who suffered with heart issues, and his wish to meet Jeremy Miller, the actor who portrayed Ben Seaver on Growing Pains. No one could have known the granting of this wish, how it would affect not only their lives, but create decades-long and life-changing friendship. But it would ultimately provide the freedom to talk about something that so many adults are silently suffering with today. When we return, we'll have Brandon and Jeremy here to talk about what researchers have discovered when matching male childhood bullying with men's health issues today.
Kim Crabill knows all about hidden shame and regret. From the time she experienced a life-altering trauma at age 4, Kim became an expert in hiding her hurt and confusion. The trick she discovered was to sing a little louder in church and to smile a little wider with friends. In her transparent story, Burdens to Blessings, Kim invites you along the journey from shame and sadness towards healing and hope. In the process, you'll encounter the upside-down truth that God uses you because of your hurt and uncertainty. Order your copy of Burdens to Blessings right away at Amazon.com or simply go to www.kimcrabill.org and click on the Shop button. Discover the confidence and courage to be you again, and discover the power of your story. Along the way, you'll help other hurting people change their burdens to blessings.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Coffee. Well, we started talking with Brandon and Jeremy, as you heard in the introduction, and they began to discover something that we wanted to talk about even more because it's so important. Well, let me back up just a little bit, though, before. Well, first, let me say welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us again.
Absolutely. Your story of friendship and the healing power of friendship is, well, worthy of a book and worthy of a movie coming out. And I think that's because it does hit the heartbeat of the loneliness, the tension that we're feeling here. And in the midst of this webinar, I guess it was, that we were doing on bullying, and we had all the statistics and everything there, you two started talking about childhood bullying. Let's talk about that, because isn't that something that you both kind of discovered about one another that you didn't know before? So another layer into this friendship?
Yeah, I mean, we've been, friends for 30 plus years now.
Yes.
And to find something new that we didn't know about each other, and again, a parallel or something that we shared separately, is just, it's amazing. It's not shocking to me at this point,
Yes.
but it's really amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Brandon, you said, after that, when I asked you to come on, you said that you're still processing this, and it's really hard to talk about. Why do you think, we're going to talk about your individual cases of bullying, but why do you think it is hard for men to talk about?
I always felt kind of shame about it. It's like I didn't know how to process it or even how to communicate it. And recently with Jeremy and I working on the film, one of the writers who's working with us asked me to talk about bullying because he wanted to use that as part of my character. that was the first time I had ever like sit down and written out some of the stories of how I was bullied. And the next thing I know, I was invited on your event to talk about it. So I felt like it was something that God was wanting me finally to break through and talk about. But those stories are things that I hadn't even told my mom. I've had many conversations with her now since we had our event, and just wanted to share some of the stories that I was sharing with you and with the writer with her, because I wanted her to hear it and know it. And she was like, oh my gosh, Brandon, you dealt with your heart defect, you dealt with the family situation. She goes, I never thought about how much you had to deal with that as well.
Wow. Yeah, because you dealt with it a lot. But also, and I want to talk about some specifics as much as you want to. We don't have to talk about the details, but here's the thing. Statistically, it's researchers say 35, at least, documented 35% of grown men still have unattended, untalked about issues, hurt, and pain because of bullying as a child. Now, here's the thing. Brandon, you had health issues. What was it you said that you couldn't walk correctly, right?
Right. So I was a toe walker. So I walked on my toes, and Mom says I walked normally until I had my first open heart surgery at age 2. And the doctors never really could explain to my mom why I became a toe walker after that. And I was a physician, working as a pediatric cardiologist, when one of my colleagues was walking behind me one day, and he saw me go up an incline. He's like, Brandon, I didn't know you had cerebral palsy. I didn't know that either. But probably he's correct. Probably during my first surgery, I probably had some event that happened that affected the way that I walked, just based on my mom describing, when it started. But the kids growing up would pick on me, unmercifully for that.
Yeah.
I remember one time the teacher leaving the classroom, and everyone in the class wanted to know why I walked the way that I walked.
Yeah. And at what age were you there?
That was about 4th, 5th grade.
Yeah. I mean, that's devastating, and those things stay in. Well, when you were talking, then you began talking, and tell us about some of your cases.
Well, I suffered a lot of bullying in a lot of different ways. I mean, my abusive stepfather was a bully.
Yeah.
I dealt with a lot of bullying from him. Throughout school, I dealt with a lot of bullying. People don't realize, they think of, you were an actor, you were on a hit show, everything was perfect. Well, that actually worked against me a lot of times. I'd go to a new school, and because I was popular and because I was on the show, all the girls either liked me or wanted to be my friends. Well, that didn't make me very popular with most of the guys, especially the alphas, the BMOCs. They didn't like that, and they decided they were going to start picking on me. I had one very kind of traumatic bully when I was young. I was in 3rd grade. The show had just, really started. It was getting really popular, and this kid who was like 3 years older than me decided he did not like it one bit. And the very first day he said anything to me, he just walked up, started calling me a bunch of names, spit in my face, and then hit me square across the jaw. And this continued for weeks, months, until as I told you when we were talking before, I dealt with it in the only way at that time I knew how. And I basically got violent. This was in the days of glass soda bottles, and I was tired of it. So I went and I bought a glass bottle of Pepsi out of the vending machine. And as I walked home, knowing that they were going to jump me at some point in my walk, I finished the bottle of Pepsi. And when I saw them coming, I smashed it against a light pole, and I started swinging it at them. It was the only thing I knew. I was that desperate at that point in time.
Right.
And, guys don't talk about this stuff.
Right.
Anything that can be perceived as weakness, men tend not to talk about, especially with each other, which is who exactly we need to be talking about it with.
Yeah, absolutely, because, again, statistics show that these things that are, we think that we're hiding them and we're stuffing things down, but what is it that's saying things that, what you can't heal what you're not willing to reveal. And so we have all these things that are touching our heart, men and women. But men is what the research is really talking about so much now, because of what it is doing in the hearts of our men in society at a time when we really need our men at their strongest. So how do you think, and you mentioned it, the shame and everything, what do you think, when you all started talking about it, what created the dynamics that caused you all to trust one another afterwards to be able to talk about this? And what did we see on the show when people were leaning in and talking about it?
I compare this to what I see in recovery all the time. It's that ability to go, wait a minute, you too.
Yes.
It's that connection of understanding.
Yes.
When you hear someone share that and you relate, you naturally feel more comfortable to open up.
Yes.
You feel connected, you know, and that was what I saw happening with that, was once one of us was able to start talking about it, there's something in there that all of us have experienced.
Yes.
And you can relate.
Yes.
And it automatically gives you that connection and understanding of another person.
Yes.
You created a safe space.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. You know, we think that because it's hidden down in us that no one knows, but the truth of the matter is it's going to be manifested in one way or the other. And that's what it's been documented in health research is, you know, aggression, anger, more bullying. You know, the one who bullied can become the bully. Addictions, you know, all these things that are bubbling inside the hearts of men now. And you think about that, well, if that's in there and it's not attended to, if it's not healed, you think about what that does in our homes.
Absolutely. I was a very, and I'm not saying it's the only reason, but it contributed to my anger issues. And compensating for the hurts and shames and whatever I felt from that, I went the other direction. I didn't become a bully, but I compensated with macho
Right.
bravissimo, you know, I mean, it was overcompensation by acting tougher and being more aggressive when I was confronted with bully-like behavior.
Right.
I was the guy who, when you pulled something and tried to bully me in a car, I was the guy who jumped out and tried to yank you out of your car. It was all overcompensation. It was
Right.
not healthy. It was not, you know.
Right. Right.
But that stuff reared its head many, many, many years after I had actually experienced the bullying.
Yeah, absolutely.
It sticks with you.
Well, one of the things that we noticed that night on the webinar, which, you know, with my counseling background, I just looked at it and I thought, this is a moment, because we saw this guy that was, what did he say? He was like 6'4", 6'5". You know, he leaned into it and he goes, oh my gosh, he started talking about the issues of his bullying. Then we have someone who is steep in health issues as a little boy. He's being bullied. And then we have you know, the mega star on a hit TV show. You're being bullied. And all of a sudden, everybody's looking around going, wait a minute, it's not just one group of people. It's happening to all of us. And it was so separated that no one knew. What did that say to you all? What does that say to our society today?
It's way more prevalent than you would ever think that it is.
Yes.
You know, and since we've had that conversation, I've actually brought up bullying with several of my guy friends just to kind of see what their take on things is. And I think one of the most interesting conversations I had about it recently was with my barber. He was actually the bully. But in time, the person that he was bullying him invited him to go to church. And he realized what he was missing. He wanted the family atmosphere of church. He goes, I would go there and they would just feed me and they would take care of me. And he came to know Christ by bullying a kid. And I thought that was the most beautiful story.
It is. It is.
That just brought up a thought for me. That was, my sons didn't experience much bullying. They were very lucky. You know, my oldest son was on the football team and very popular. He didn't experience much. My other son was more bookish and more of a nerd and proud of it, but he was in the band and music, so he had his nobody bullied him really. My youngest was scary to most kids, so they didn't bully him either. But you know, when things like that would come up, it was something that I took away from recovery, was being able to look at people who behave that way, and it's still something I use today, as sick people.
Right.
You know, people who
Hurting.
are emotionally and spiritually sick.
Yeah.
And if you can look at them in that way, then you have more compassion for them and you can really reach them and talk to them without feeling that resentment.
Yeah. It comes back to really knowing who we are in Christ to be able to handle that. But, you know, it's like, who wants to have to handle that? Who wants to, you know, teach their child that you have to handle that? I mean, that's a really hard thing for us to do. And I think for me, the healing of our nation in the bullying is for the men and the women to be able to step forward and say, you know, have a better understanding of it, to really be able to take away the shame, guilt, and the regret, right?
It's taking away the stigma.
Yes.
And it's, again, I relate a lot of this to recovery.
Yes.
The more you talk about it, the more it's out in the open, the less it's taboo,
Yes.
the better this gets. It is the exact same thing with addiction.
Yes.
It is. I mean, we've only now, you know, after 20, 30 years, are just now starting to understand addiction and it becoming more prominent and more in the front. There's not as much of a stigma. It's still there, but it's slowly breaking down. And I feel that the same thing can happen with bullying. You know, it really can. We just have to talk about it. People have to open up. The more people are aware of it, the more it comes to the forefront, and the less people will be ashamed that it happened.
Right. Well, and you know, people say, oh, well, just talking doesn't really help. It does help.
It does.
It has to. It has to be able to be removed from the inside. Healing begins when we speak it and someone accepts us in that. And the more, but that takes a lot of courage sometimes, right, to speak it. The way that it happened on our webinar, it was so organic. It just kind of fell out of people's mouths and it just happened, which really made me go back to, is this coincidental or is this God?
Exactly.
And I think it was God and him wanting us to create a conversation so that people can be healed, so that our homes can be healed. When you were bullied, did any parents, did any adults, school, anybody pick up on it?
My particular situation, especially because there was actual assaults going on. I mean, I was getting beaten.
Oh my gosh, so sorry.
By this kid who, you know, if you want to talk about it sticking with you,
Yeah.
this is when I was 8 years old, and I can still tell you the kid's first and last name.
Wow.
I mean, it has stuck with me that long.
Wow.
Him and his best friend just beat my butt every day after school, pretty much. So my mother couldn't help but notice I'm coming home bruised, and her solution was to put me in martial arts, which did help with self-confidence and a lot of other, but as I said, I kind of overcompensated and became much more aggressive than I needed to be. It was in a time when you didn't have meetings with the principal and everything else about bullying.
Right.
You know, it was brought to the teacher's attention, it was brought to the principal's attention. I think maybe his mom and my mom met in the principal's office, nothing came of it, and it didn't change anything. They continued doing exactly what they did. They bullied me throughout school and then beat me up after school. So it more happens now. You know, I mean, maybe it's a little bit of overkill now in a lot of situations, but more happens now, and that's a good thing. You know, more teachers are getting involved when this is occurring and trying to, you know, change the situation in some way. Back then, I mean, this is 30, you know, almost 40 years ago now.
So Jeremy, let me ask you a real personal question. You said you didn't mind. Do you think that played into the anxiety that you had and maybe the addictions, or did any of that have a part in
I think
that?
it absolutely had a part. As I've said before, the mental and sexual abuse I suffered at the hands of my stepfather was the biggest contributing factor in that alcohol was how I ran from that pain.
Right.
But the insecurities, the lack of self-confidence, the social anxiety disorder that I've struggled with since I was a kid, yes, I do believe a lot of that is rooted in the bullying experiences, starting with those two kids and continuing with my stepfather, who came into my life not long after that. So I do believe it was a very key factor, maybe a smaller factor, but still a key factor in a lot of the reasons why I chose to seek solace in a bottle.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's just sad. I mean, it just breaks your heart. I'm sure you talked about telling your mom. I'm sure she's still thinking about that at night. But you had to. I mean, I'm so glad that you did. That's how the conversation started. But this is why we need to talk, you all. This is why we have to have platforms where, and I just want to thank you all for the courage, to really talk about it, because maybe that will open the door for someone. I mean, we know statistically that's one of the reasons that so many kids are abused in their homes, because their dads don't know what to do with this anger that's in them. The alcoholism, the addictions, there's so much healing that can be done, and that's the hope. Brandon, one of the things that I wanted to mention when we start talking about, what we can do, how we can move forward, how your stories can start speaking hope. I believe that we're all in the process of healing from things that happened to us. I think we're all somewhere between the hurt and the healing. But in the process of this, you said something that you have started practicing in your medical practice that just touched my heart with kids. Would you like to share that?
Yeah, so a lot of kids come to me because they have chest pain or they feel that their heart is beating abnormally. And if you really kind of dig down in that, sometimes it's rooted in anxiety, it's rooted in depression. And one of the things I always ask kids, are they being bullied at school? And I've had many patients just break down and start crying, and that's the parent's first clue that something isn't right.
Right.
So that's always been kind of interesting to me. I also turn around and ask my patients, are you bullying anyone? And I've had a few of them kind of make these faces and, kind of let me know, well, yeah, I'm probably not treating, little Johnny as well as I should,
Right.
type thing.
Right. That's amazing to me, and then I'm sure you have ways to follow up. Well, guys, we're gonna have to take a break. I knew this was gonna go by so fast, but when we come back, I want to talk about. I mean, I feel like you all have started something here, and we were talking about different ways to open up this discussion. Because when you do look at the statistics, I think I don't know if I mentioned this before, but 35% of men walking around right now, are manifesting these behaviors that they don't want to have, but it's because of this pain. And we know that bullies bully because probably they were bullied, but it's got to stop somewhere. And the stopping is for people, men, women, but right now we're talking about men, to have the courage to step up and say, this happened to me. Let's move on with the healing so that we can be the voice of hope. So when we come back, I want to talk about how we can create, if there's someone at home, how you would encourage them to talk. What can we do with this issue that's so prevalent in our world today? So we'll be right back to wrap this very important show up, okay? Be right back.
The most amazing gift one could ever receive is knowing how deeply we are loved by God. Yet it's the very thing we sometimes struggle with and fail to comprehend. To learn more, Kim Crabill will send you this devotional treasure titled Cherished. These pages contain a daily dose of His infinite love for you. The 365 daily readings will help you take your eyes off the day's demands and focus on the God who loves you more than you can ever imagine. God will show us all how active and personal He can be in life as He brings this courage to our lives. We will all discover the joy of recognizing and responding to daily opportunities to encourage and uplift others. To get a copy rushed to you right away, simply go to Amazon.com or directly to Kim's website at www.kimcrabill.org.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Coffee. I'm so glad that you joined us today, and I'm so glad that you too joined us today because you were brave enough and courageous enough to confront an issue that really needs to be talked about. Brandon, you brought up a point about the ones who did bully. Talk to us about that.
So over the years, I've actually heard from people who bullied me in the past. I've gotten an email from a kid that bullied me in high school. I had no idea that he was talking about me behind my back and doing all of these things. And I even heard about a medical student who was in school with me sent me a Facebook message one time, and they just said, I didn't know what you were going through at the time, and I really was uncomfortable with myself at the time. So I think as people age and get older, even the bullies themselves want to talk about what they did in the past. And I think that's interesting.
It is. It goes back to that that we talked about in our previous show, forgiving yourself, being able. How does your faith play into this?
Again, for me, it comes back to things I've picked up as I've gotten older. You know, you don't come to these understandings as a very young person, but we're all only doing the best we can with the tools we have at the moment.
Yes.
Some people are at different journeys in their faith. They're at different points in their belief.
Yes.
People who had a strong faith at one point may be struggling right now because of something that has occurred.
Yes.
You know, so leaning into your faith and understanding that the people you're dealing with who may be hurting you are sick emotionally and, you know, spiritually.
Yes.
And no matter what's going on, they're doing the best they can at this moment with the tools they have available at this moment.
That's such a voice of compassion, and you learn that voice of compassion by being hurt.
Absolutely. And honestly, I find it easier to take that tone when I'm, you know, when I'm praying regularly, when I'm keeping close to God and keeping close to my faith.
Absolutely.
Because that is, you know, the compassion of Christ and everything else that we strive for. So it's easier to deal with the people who are hurting you and are difficult if you can look at it in that way.
Absolutely. You know, I always say opposition is our opportunity, but it sure doesn't mean that it's easy all the time. Well, let's just wind up the show. If there's someone out there, what would you say to some man who knows that the hurt and the pain is so deep and that it is causing him to behave in a manner that he's not happy with? What would you say to him?
I would say open up to your friend, because I bet they have an experience that's similar.
Yes.
And they probably have things that they want to talk about too. So just open the conversation. You may be surprised where it goes.
Yes.
Absolutely. Find someone you trust to talk about it and begin the conversation. The more you start to open up about it, the easier it becomes, the easier it becomes to deal with. And again, in the long run, the more we all talk about it, the less people are going to be ashamed of it, and the more normal it becomes to deal with the pain.
There you go. And the shame and the guilt and the regret began to fall away as you talk about
Amen.
it. And you began to realize it's something that happened that shouldn't have happened. You endured it. It wasn't because of we did anything wrong. And you just have to keep reminding ourselves that which we're not willing to confront is never going to be healed. But those things that we can confront, God has already said that we can be more than conquerors in it. It doesn't mean that it's going to be, just a flip of the switch and it's going to happen, but it's going to be by talking and processes and healing. So I thank you all so much for tackling this very important topic. It's very healing.
Thank you for
so
giving
much.
us the chance to talk about it.
Thank you for having us come on.
Absolutely. And friends, I hope that you heard what Jeremy said. He said the more we talk about it, the more healing is going to happen. So today on this show, we started the conversation. I hope that you will continue the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next time right here on Coffee. Bye, everybody.